So, welcome to Big Softies. We're here to talk about tech, share our stories, experiences, and insights. I'm Gavin Adam, and in each episode, we feature thinkers and leaders in tech, their paths, the obstacles they've faced and overcome, and what they've learned along the way. Today, we're really excited to welcome Graem Cox, who's the CEO of Attercorp. So, before we kick off, Graem, can you give us that sort of 5-minute elevator pitch of, right, what's your name and where'd you come from?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Gavin. So, thank you for the intro. I'm Graem. My background in my entire career has been in artificial intelligence. I have a degree in artificial intelligence from Edinburgh University, which I managed to achieve in the very early part of the 1990s. And I've been working in machine learning and AI for, therefore, 30 years now. And have seen a lot of changes along the way, although not least in the last couple of years as things have really started to accelerate. Along that way, I have worked for global consultancies and I have built, run and sold my own technology businesses in specialist vertical fields such as cybersecurity and human emotional measurement. But all using machine learning and artificial intelligence as the core technology to deliver whatever the business content is. More recently, I spent several years doing technical due diligence for private equity and venture capital companies, helping them understand the value of the artificial intelligence in the organizations they were looking at acquiring or, in fact, selling. And that led me to realize that as part of this generative AI revolution that we're currently a part of, there is a strong need for organizations to be supported in developing strategy and assisting them with the execution of developing AI-powered solutions that integrate into their businesses, into their customer-facing SaaS platforms, et cetera, et cetera. So deep use of AI and machine learning within technology organizations, providing the AI expertise and that cutting edge knowledge to go with the normally very high quality software engineering skills that our customers already have.
So, and I suppose let's start there. I mean, the world, as you've already said, has changed quite considerably, and you're one of the few who've probably seen it from the ground up when it comes to the AI side. And it's one of those things. Most people's experiences, I'm afraid I'm going to have to use the Skynet example, but up until a couple of years ago, it was something you might see on Terminator or Battlestar Galactica, and about 18 months ago, people suddenly started playing around with ChatGPT, and I believe it meets the Turing test, and people have started to really either get very excited by it or very scared of it. I suppose really, fundamentally, nothing has really changed in the world of AI except for the fact that you've got Joe Public now have access to it through ChatGPT, and that's been their experience of it. Is that a naive viewpoint, or where do you think or rather, why do you think now this genie's been uncorked, and everyone now thinks that this is the next big thing, or isn't the next big thing, depending on how you look at it? It's now that we've just got more mice in the hamster wheel.
That's a lovely way to put it. Yeah, that's exactly it. So we're still using neural networks as one of the fundamental underpinnings of machine learning technology, which is a trained model, which has weights. The weights apply to each of the many neurons or nodes within a neural network. By changing those weights repeatedly over time using a feedback loop to drive the training, you eventually produce outputs from whatever the input is that look like the answer that you want to get. Back when I was studying these things at university, you might have 1,000 nodes in 1,000 neurons in your neural network. Today, a small large language model, so Mistral as an open source model, for example, is 7 billion nodes. That is considered a very small model. GPT-4 is actually a collection of models. It's not a single model, but it's going to total 100 billion training nodes in across neurons in its setup. It's absolutely enormous. So the compute power required to train these models is just vast and was completely impossible until not so long ago with the graphics processor revolution that NVIDIA and the like have helped drive. And then the quantity of data that is used to train these natural language models is utterly enormous. So GPT is famously trained on most of the content on the internet. And there are some interesting lawsuits surrounding that, but it has consumed most of the available data that is the textual data that is out there to do so. And that's what drives these amazing capabilities in the models today.
Certainly, as an end user of it, which I am all the time, I love it. It's a game changer as far as I'm concerned for the various use cases I have. But there seems to be a perception that it is a general intelligence, right? General artificial intelligence. When actually, really, isn't it just really just a probability model?
Really, it may just be a probability model, but I guess my question to you, Gavin, would be, can you be sure that you're not just a probability model?
And that's normally what I counter with as well. So yes, it is. I mean, it's one of those things. Perception is reality, I suppose, and we now have this perception that there is this ghost in the machine, but it does seem that the ghost is getting a bit louder and more capable than it once was before.
Yeah, completely. And the kind of things that get a bit freaky when you're talking about these massive models are the unintended effects, the kind of emergent properties of these models that they show that nobody really understands why, including the people who build them. So, for example, it's a reasonably well documented fact that if you tell ChatGPT that you'll give it money in return for a better answer, you will actually get slightly better responses from it. You'll get more factual information. You'll get slightly better, more complete answers. Nobody really knows why that's the case, but it is true. It's an emergent property of the training data that it responds to bribery. There's a whole, there's a whole list of these things that everybody scratches their head and says, "Well, why is that?" But it's very much the case. I think you're just referring to what you said there. You spoke about general artificial intelligence, and I think that is so. There is a very big and very subtle difference between general artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence. So GAI is exactly what we're seeing today in these larger language models, these massive models like the ones built by OpenAI, so ChatGPT, for example, or Gemini from Google, or Cohere's models, or Meta's Llama 2. They are general purpose language models. They know quite a lot about a lot of things. They're quite happy to lie about some of it, but they will also give you lots of really interesting, highly opinionated information associated with them. They're very general purpose language tools. So artificial general intelligence, or AGI, is the search for a new, independent, self-thinking, self-aware intelligence that may one day rival or even exceed our own intelligence, which is a very specialist activity, and actually not that many researchers are specifically focused on that end goal. But that's when we start talking about Skynet and Transformers, an artificial intelligence that might decide that we are a threat rather than an asset, and try and do something about it if it had agency. That's AGI. The GAI, General Artificial Intelligence, is what we're building today, and is what you're seeing in these big models like OpenAI's ChatGPT.
Right, yeah, and Gemini and Llama 2 and the various other ones you've mentioned.
Yes.
And, there's been a number of sort of recent discussions around these models being re-engineered to address the various biases. As it does appear that there's this sort of astroturfing type behavior that, well, either intentionally or unintentionally, because it's consuming the whole of the internet, not everything on the internet is accurate. And I suppose if you think it's true and you read enough of it, you end up in an echo chamber. Is that really what's some of the behaviors that we're seeing, or some of the reasons for the hallucinations or the odd answers we sometimes get back?
Um, so two different things there, I think. So hallucinations are possibly another thing. So let's tackle that separately. But in terms of bias, which I think is a really interesting area and so important, where bias is and managing bias in model behavior is super important because we are increasingly seeing these models, these tools, as being oracles of truth. Whether they are or they're not, we're increasingly relying on them to give us opinions, to write our blog articles for us, to create software for us, to act as co-pilots and assistants in our lives to help us in a whole range of things. So we want our assistants to be trustworthy. In the future, we may even be heading to some fields where we look at more of an autopilot model, and actually the models are just doing things on our behalf, at which point it's utterly crucial that these models behave as good citizens and do what we would want them to do. Let's be clear, not all humans behave in the way that we want them to, and managing society is a problematic issue all by itself. We don't want to start in creating AIs that act antisocially. So whether you're an individual or a corporate, thinking about responsible AI and what it means, I think really matters. So having a set of ethics and making sure that your AIs will align to those ethics. If you're leveraging...
And how do these companies navigate that fine line, that balancing point between sort of being very innovative and taking that sort of ethical responsibility?
It's really hard because, not least because we have bias and unfairness in our society. And you were just alluding to this a minute ago, Gavin, that if we just take the data that exists on the internet and feed it into a model and say, there you go, act on that, it is going to come back with bias. Again, very well documented behaviors such as, until recently, if you ask Midjourney or any of the other image creation tools to create you a picture of a CEO, they would create a middle-aged white guy. 99 times out of 100, and so on and so forth. That is not because of a failure in the model. That is because the model was given images of CEOs, and it learned from that and said, well, that's what a CEO looks like. It is just the fact that I think if you look at the FTSE 250, I think it's some odd number, like 9% of them have got a female CEO in place at the moment. So if you want our AIs to show our children pictures of female CEOs and racial minorities and other diversity and inclusion goals, you have to actually engineer the data that you're putting in order to have positive bias on it. You can't give it reality. Google fell foul of this just 3 weeks ago. So in middle of February, when it rolled out its new Gemini model, where Google have got a very strong policy and approach to tackling bias in its models, but it went too far. And quite famously, people discovered that if you asked Google to Gemini to create images of World War II German soldiers, then it would create Native American soldiers and black females in Nazi uniforms, which, you can see what it's trying to do there, but the net effect is not actually positive in the end. And so there is a whole artificial construct that we have to go through in creating the data set that we want to reduce bias, which has to be handled by humans first and foremost.
I suppose it's life imitating art, or vice versa, in the same way that we see in the world of social media.
Yes, it is. And the echo chambers that we get stuck into in social media are a perfect example of the biased information sources that we end up being fed through algorithms. So if you allow similar algorithms to choose data that operates in AI, then you will end up with an AI with a very particular set of biases. Now, you might do that to create the world's most liberal AI, but that liberal AI will be offensive to a whole group of other people in the process. We need to be very careful about how we build these tools because they are seen as authoritative. They are seen as being capable of making decisions rather than just providing decision support as traditional software does. And if we are going to put them in these positions of power, we need to know that they reflect the decision-making process and views that we want them to. And that can only be done through a very conscious approach to responsible AI and a responsible AI framework, which informs the whole process of bringing AI to life, whether that is integrating it into an enterprise or creating it from scratch as a researcher.
I suppose it brings up almost quite a deep or interesting philosophical debate, and one that, because we're at a stage where we are generating or sculpting this landscape and having to think about these in a different context, all it's really doing is surfacing the existing issues that already exist in society.
You're absolutely right. And this is an opportunity for us to get this right. We are on the cusp of a strongly transformative phase in our society as AI becomes a core part of that. That's not revolutionary or scandalous to say. I think we have been through other revolutions in our lifetimes, and social media is one that you've just referenced. I think we got that wrong. I think that where we've ended up with social media, with the echo chambers that we've created and the bubbles that we get pushed into, and all of the negative consequences that are well documented that social media can have on our children and on young and vulnerable people, is a result of a lack of guardrails and thought that was put in place at the start of this process, and the willingness to allow commercial pressures and the pursuit of profits to drive these technologies. I think because AI is seen as so earth-shatteringly transformational, we are in a much better place this time around to have a chance of engineering our AIs to be of stronger value to society, whereas we didn't really see it coming in the kind of post-dot-com bubble as social media platforms such as Facebook started to take over the world. I hope that's
we just didn't know how that they were going to affect us.
Exactly. Whereas now,
these days it's
the other way around. The hype is kind of leading reality. Yeah,
it's amusing. My 18-year-old, we would often he's quite keen to debate on pretty much anything, and we were talking about the political landscape and the fact that we're about to potentially have a general election at some point this year. And he was just saying, "Oh God, I'd much rather it was done by an AI, because it at least then that way it might not be quite so influenced by lobbyists or other bias." I was saying, yeah, but you're still going to get the same sort of challenges until we iron out some of these slightly more interesting nuances.
Well, I mean, but that is a perfect example of the problem that we face. It is absolutely the case that once you've built an AI, it will behave in what it believes fair means. But its definition of fair will have been set by the actions and beliefs of the people who created it. No, so I don't want to be overly controversial, but if you ask Elon Musk to create your AI, then you've got to expect a very different kind of outputs than if you ask Sam Altman of OpenAI to create your AI, because they have very well documented different political viewpoints.
Yeah, and do you think that's this is the new arms race as to who gets there first? Whoever gets that land grab wins.
Totally the new arms race. And of course, this goes well beyond corporates and money making. You have the US versus China in this are the two very big 800-pound gorillas in the room fighting this out. Currently, the US is considerably ahead of China in AI research and innovation, but AI is a tool that can, as a propaganda and influencer tool alone, can have massive impacts on the world and opinions of nations, can influence and potentially even drive the outcomes of democratic elections, and in fact undemocratic elections where possible, and is hugely important. And we see state-driven use of AI for propaganda, for predictive purposes, and even for weaponized purposes being a major part of our future at this point. And because we live in such a fractured world, AI will undoubtedly be used as a tool to drive benefit for one nation versus another. I hope, I am an optimist at heart, despite saying all of that. And I see that the EU, and I'm such an optimist that I still almost consider us part of the EU, but there you go. I see the EU as a potential driver for good in this process. So the EU has now ratified and approved, and it's now legal, the EU AI Act, which is the world's best legal structure for governing and controlling AI at multi-state level, and provides a benchmark for everybody else on how AI should be tackled responsibly. Of course, Russia as well, but China and the US don't have to pay any attention to that. That's really for corporates trying to get into Europe. But nevertheless, it demonstrates a much more mature approach to the subject.
I suppose we're going to start seeing more and more of this, governance and constraints being applied. But is the danger not going to be that the people who choose to live inside the auspices of the law and the frameworks are potentially going to be hampered by, rather than the ones that choose to live outside of those?
It's classic game theory, isn't it? The game theory always shows that if there is a lone rule breaker, they will always win against the majority that obey the system. You're back into societal engineering and use of tools for nefarious purposes at a very high level. AI is not the only thing, to be clear, that this is happening with. I mean, I mentioned in my intro that I spent 10 years of my life working in cybersecurity, building machine learning engines for early detection of hack attack. Built a company which I ultimately sold to Dell and forms a core part of Dell's global secure works cybersecurity function. And when I started that in the 90s, cybersecurity was the concern of every company. It became the concern of every individual. By the middle of the noughties, it was the concern of every government, and it has since then been used as not just a defense mechanism, but an attack mechanism against other states. And I'm afraid it is the nature of the world we live in that all technology will end up that way, and that is a part of the role that AI will play in our future. I don't like it, but it's just true.
I suppose anecdotally, speaking to friends and former colleagues at places like HMRC, I know they get approximately 500,000 cyber attacks every day on the tax platform.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, but it's a huge number.
I mean, insane amount. Okay, so obviously the sky's about to fall, the world's about to end, we're all, doomed. Let's try and become a little bit more positive now. So, other than obviously these, the ethics and the bias and the challenges we're facing, what about some of the more positive aspects? Where are the areas where where you've seen already it tipping the needle enough for us to go, wow, if only we could have done this however long, how much faster would we be along this curve? Where are the areas you think are most exciting at the moment?
Okay, so, I could take that in different directions. So we've been talking at a societal level. Let me just bring that down a bit, and let's just talk about, in business and in building and running companies as individuals, how will AI help us rather than hinder us? So we're the one extreme picture is AI just takes over everything and does us out of jobs. But actually the reality and what we're seeing over the next coming decade is that AI will assist us in doing things faster, better, more efficiently. It will take some of the less interesting and ultimately valuable parts of our jobs away and allow us to focus on the bits that we develop our real skills for. Software engineering is a classic example of that. So I mentioned that I've been doing a lot of due diligence over the last few years. I've probably seen 50 companies in the last couple of years where I've had the pleasure and privilege of leaning over the CTO's shoulder and having a look at the way that they operate inside their organization, how the software engineering team works, how they produce their code, what their quality standards are. And we've gone from 2 years ago, I would say, 1% to 5% maximum of all software was created by Copilot tools, boilerplate construction for interface code, that kind of thing. More recently, in the last few months, I'm now seeing up to 25% of all code being produced in some organizations being produced through AIs. 25%, an absolutely massive amount. Now, that at this point does not seem to have caused a reduction in jobs. It may have caused a slowdown in the software industry, along with the economic slowdown that we've seen in the last year, but it hasn't resulted in a lot of redundancies. What it has done, in my direct experience in talking to these teams and working with them, is produced a lot more job satisfaction from the more senior coders out there who can focus on problem solving and generate the construct code so much more quickly, so much more readily, being able to get on with the interesting parts of their job and be more efficient, to deliver more code more quickly, to solve more problems. And I've found that almost universally, I say that with some hesitation, but almost universally, software engineers love Copilot tools. They don't and they shouldn't trust them implicitly. The software that they produce still has to go through the same quality processes, the same testing, the same rigor that human produced code does, but it makes their job easier. It does bring into question how juniors become those senior programmers that can benefit from these efficiencies, and do we start to lose people at the lower end because there's a slowdown in hiring? But people's jobs at that senior level have got better as a result. And I think the same is true in marketing departments and in the roles of people who are creating discursive text and other natural language output, that their output is improved and their appreciation of their job is improved through the use of the tools.
I suppose there's a couple of things along those lines. One is that if you go back in time to when we all first started playing with home PCs and such like, where you only had 16K chip and very limited processing power, we all had to write very, very tight code to be able to make sure that it could actually operate. And then, with the increase of, thanks to Moore's law and everything else, it became much, much easier for us to be able to churn out stuff. And then there were 4GLs and there were various other tools and IDEs and things to be able to make our lives easier to write code. Now that we're getting this sort of the Copilot type environment and we're able to sort of churn out an awful lot more code, do you think we're at danger of getting more and more bloatware?
That's a really interesting question. So, does code get less efficient through use of automated tool sets? I'm not convinced that it does. I think there's an argument to say that we're in a world of bloatware generally, that we're mostly dealing with higher level languages and an increasing lack of coders who actually understand the full stack. I know a lot of coders that if you ask them about garbage collection routines, they wouldn't have the slightest idea what you were talking about unless it was a council service. And that is a function, I think, of the fact that we're all building on the shoulders of everybody who's come before us. And so there are so many technical roles that don't involve a requirement to understand what is underneath the hood. When you come down to working on hardware devices and in limited memory, limited processing power, etc., these things become important again. I've just come back out of spending 5 years on a project working with wearable devices and the like, and have a renewed appreciation for it. But I think that there's a lot of poor code out there. I don't believe that AI makes that worse. I think it just means that it's written by a machine.
I suppose it's do you sort of see this, I guess, the world of prompt engineering becoming the new coding practice?
Well, will it? That's a really interesting question, actually. And this got a little bit techie, but my company, Attercorp, we create solutions for people using large language models and NLP machine learning engines. So prompt engineering has been a big part of our consideration over the last few months. Actually, we're increasingly moving to a compiled protocol called DSPY, which is actually providing a programmatic interface for interacting with models. So we are already in this early stage starting to move back towards a programmatic approach to getting data out of models. And I think, in terms of quality assurance and accountability, transparency in models, reliability and repeatability, this is massively beneficial. So we started out seeing these models as, you have to talk to them like they're people in order to get things out of them. They're not, they are still compute engines, and it turns out that there are good ways to program them. And that's really the cutting edge of what we're working on at the moment.
I certainly, in the projects that I've been involved in when it comes to using large language models, one of the biggest challenges has been that piece around quality assurance and be able to have that sort of repeatable, testable paradigm. So does that give you that opportunity then, this approach?
It really helps. So there are a number of challenges for quality assurance in building AI solutions. One of those, starting with the fact that all machine learning and AI solutions are stochastic in nature or probabilistic. So, you unlike a software feature, which either it works or it doesn't, and if it doesn't, it's a bug. In the AI world, it'll work most of the time, and sometimes you get a false negative, sometimes you'll get a false positive, etc., just as you will from a human being. Humans are not 100% accurate all of the time, and that is the starting challenge: being able to actually measure the effectiveness, the accuracy, the repeatability, etc., of a model. The tools that allow you to more quantitatively program these models are definitely help in the quantitative measures that come back out of them. And this is one of our really key areas for research where we're doing some really great work at the moment, because our standards is to be able to produce AI that is worthy of inclusion into a production quality SaaS customer facing solution, that it's cost effective, it's reliable, it's that it's performant, that so the processing time for round trip is short enough to be acceptable to a human, etc., and that testing quality and reliability of the solution is fundamental. So there are ways that are coming out to do it with, but clearly when you're dealing with language and you're dealing with creativity, which is at the heart of all AI large language models, testing is challenging, very challenging.
So one of the, I guess along that thread for a second, Graem, one of the things I'm asked on a regular basis is, oh, look, I've been using ChatGPT. It's great. I can get it to do this, this, and this. But what I want to be able to do is use my own specific knowledge base to be able to answer those same questions. So I don't necessarily have to hire quite as many people. I can just have some, clever tech in the background, and they can just sort of do it for me. That seems to be a increasingly accepted approach. What do you think the challenges are? I'm obviously aware of some, but how should people really be thinking about it?
So, it's the heart of that question. Should you trust models like ChatGPT, or when should you trust models like ChatGPT?
Well, it's more they love the way it works, but they want to be able to apply their own bias or their own knowledge base and use that as a body of knowledge or corpus of understanding versus what's on the wider internet.
Absolutely, and actually, what you've done is just describe one of the core use cases of the tools and software that we're creating. So possibly the best way to reduce hallucinations in large language models, a hallucination being the model coming out with something which is not true, but probably sounds very plausible, is to ground the model on a set of finite data, whether that be a document store, one or more databases, internet websites, whatever it might be, and tell the model that it is only allowed to use that data in giving its answer.
So along that, I suppose, exploring that a little bit further, the ways that I've heard, or I often hear people talking about RAG and embeddings. Are those the only two approaches? What are the ways that people can achieve what you just described?
So RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, literally means giving the model a set of input data, which is transformed in some manner, and asking it to only answer questions on that data. So chat over your data would be another way to put it. The way that most people are using ChatGPT today is simply treating it as an oracle of all knowledge and just asking it questions and expecting it to know everything. That is leveraging the pre-training data that exists within GPT. So it consumed a lot of information, as in a lot of information, in order to get where it is. You trust that it's going to tell you the truth based on that pre-training data. The third and slightly more subtle approach, which is often used in combination with document input, is fine-tuning a model, which is taking a pre-trained model, so it's already very capable, and then training it to be specialist in one particular subject. So you do an extra training cycle, which teaches it about, I don't know, English law, for example, so that it's not going to answer about US law when you ask it a question. It's going to answer about English and Welsh law. And a combination of that plus grounding it on document storage of some description tends to be how people are using NLP and LLMs as a knowledge retrieval mechanism. One of our, just very quickly on the top of that, the value, as far as I'm concerned, for a lot of systems in delivering these, chat over your data solutions, is in the knowledge engineering layer that has to go on top of the data engineering. So data engineering is bring all your data together in one place so it's accessible, make sure there's no big gaps in the data, make sure that it doesn't conflict, make sure that it's reasonably coherent. That will give you a pretty good set of responses from a model. However, when you start building higher level knowledge inference layers on the top of that, using concepts such as graph technologies, which is an area that I'm particularly keen on, that enables the AI to see connections in the data that otherwise are not apparent. So graph technologies are used by all of the big social networks to say, if you like this, you'll probably like that. So it connects a series of things that it knows about you in that case to say, well, actually, thinking outside the box, if you like these three things, then this other thing over here is, other people seem to like that as well. So let's throw this into your feed and see whether that works for you. Similarly, when you're looking across a broad swathe of corporate data, those unexpected inferences that can come from building graph structures on top of your data are often where the most valuable information can come from. So I'm a big fan of a knowledge engineering layer that happens on top of the data before you start implementing an AI to query and infer across it.
It's we talked about echo chambers. It's like I'm in one at the moment. This is exactly what I've been talking to people about as of late.
Okay, brilliant.
No, I'm a massive fan of graph DBs and things. And we've been very fortunate. Sorry, I've gone off topic a bit, but we've been very lucky recently to to be able to have a sort of a discovery phase with a client where we've been doing exactly that. And essentially creating a sort of knowledge engineering layer on top of it based on a graph database, which we're then feeding back into an LLM or training our own fine-tuned LLM, which is proving to be really exciting.
Fantastic. Sounds amazing.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it's I actually get quite excited whenever I start thinking about it even. So anyway, let's get back on topic. Sorry. So, it's, I suppose, it's got everyone's imaginations firing off in every direction at the moment, and has done for the past 18 months. OpenAI having the largest ever sign-up base in however many days, being the most successful thing ever, et cetera, et cetera. How much of it is really just teenage sex?
That is brilliant. I love it. Yes. So I talk to a lot of CIOs and CTOs, and I would say as a qualitative number, but nevertheless, roughly 70% of all C-suite technology leaders are still largely in a watch and wait mode at the moment. So what does that mean? They all know that that people across their organization will be leveraging these third-party tools, and shadow AI as a kind of adjunct to shadow IT is now a major risk for organizations. People are taking all sorts of very sensitive corporate data, chucking it at ChatGPT or Google Gemini or Bing or whatever it might be, and just hoping for great answers, and thus breaching the corporate data perimeter left, right, and center. So most CIOs and CTOs have now got a policy in place. How they're enforcing that policy is a really good question, but they will have a policy in place to say, use this, don't use that. The forward-thinking ones have then actually provided some tooling to stave off the problem. So here's the approved tool, which is the easy option at this point is implementing Microsoft Copilot, which obviously if you're a Microsoft Office user already and you're willing to shoulder that cost, or they've got some custom access point into a ChatGPT and interface or whatever. So they're at least controlling and monitoring what data is being fed into these third-party AI systems. But beyond that, actually using AI as for feature development and for transforming processes within an organization, I would say about 30% have got production quality projects that are underway or that have delivered already. So there's some outliers that have been using machine learning for decades. They're built around this. They're incredible. The majority of corporates, which are not primarily probably in the technology sectors, they are technology enabled rather than technology centric. They are watching and trying to form an opinion of what to do next. However, they're all being seriously pressured by their stakeholders, by the rest of the C-suite, by the board, to have a strategy for AI. Every CTO I ever speak to has been told, you have to have a strategy. You have to have a roadmap to go with that strategy. What are we doing and when are we doing it? And I think it's really important to give it the time to undertake that process, to look at what the possibility is, look at what the costs would be, look where the ROI exists for various types of AI potential project, where the risk is in those projects. We spoke about responsible AI and risks of bias or unfairness in the output, and therefore reputational risks, practical risks, security risks, data risks, etc. And putting all that together. So here's the benefit, here's the risk, here's the cost. If we had money to do things, where would we start? Where's the lowest hanging fruit? How do we move down this path? Partly because it's really good for the company reputation to be able to, the CEO always wants to be talking about what we're doing with AI. Partly because it is a genuine opportunity for transformation and potentially a once in a career opportunity for a lot of people as AI hits us. And because it is a very fast moving train, or at least I would say it is a fast moving train, but it is accelerating rapidly. And for technology leaders need to be on that train in some form, or catching up could prove to be quite challenging in the future. So staying abreast of AI and AI developments, I think, is now a crucial requirement for technology leaders.
I mean, when we first started talking today, we were saying that really, fundamentally that the same approach is being used, but we've got a much more sophisticated machine or more horses in the bonnet, essentially. With the advent of things like quantum computing, do you think that's going to be even more of a game changer?
That is another great question, but it's a pure crystal ball one. So at the moment, I don't see any evidence of quantum actually changing anything in the world around us. Whereas I can look at AI and I can see practical transformational changes that AI is happening on our lives today. So much like crypto, I mean, actually blockchain as an underpinning technology, I'm a big fan of. Blockchain has not found its killer app. Blockchain has not changed our world at all, unless you were lucky enough to buy some Bitcoin a few years ago. So it remains a potential technology looking for a solution. Today, my personal view, you might get some complaints about this, but my personal view is that quantum is much the same. If it works and if it can be built reliably at scale and for the right money, then it may well be the next great transformation we go through. I mean, the breaking Moore's law and going into a whole new paradigm of computational power. Quantum is our great white hope. I think it's too early to say from my perspective personally. I'm sure you might find some other experts in the Sussex community who might have a stronger view of that than I do.
I think there's quite a big hotspot of quantum in our local vicinity.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm thinking maybe you need to get those on for a future episode.
Yeah, without a doubt. So with your crystal ball out for the next however long, choose a time frame. But what do you think is the next things which we should start being aware of?
When we're focusing in on AI, we're talking about generative AI first and foremost, which has been this really big transformational shift in the last couple of years. The big changes in that are around multimedia. So we started out with one type of generative AI system was really good with language. Another type of generative AI system is really good with images. We've seen the image generation move to video generation with OpenAI Sora, Runway being another great example of video creation from a prompt. We're seeing Gemini and ChatGPT-4 able to translate and interpret images and create images based on prompts. And that whole interaction with multiple senses is absolutely the way forward. So on the one hand, we get this much richer ability of AIs to interpret the world around them. So understanding what they see fundamentally, but that moves when you go into video and therefore real time, understanding what they experience, understanding nuances in human communication. So not just understanding what we say, but understanding how we say it. The emotional content of our speech is really important. If I say something in one way, it can have a very different meaning to exactly the same words said in a different manner. So understanding human emotional content and vocal prosody is really important. And therefore that whole experiential side of AI in understanding the world that we humans live in is a major step forward. The flip side to that is the AI's ability to create in that world as it understands the human experience better. Its ability to create things that we as humans think are amazing will increase. So you start to see that really digging into the creative industries in a big way as the co-pilot tools for video and film creation, for bots, co-pilots that are speech-based rather than text-based. So rather than typing to your AI in the future, I have a very strong sense of we'll be talking to it. And the reason I think that, so slight aside from this, but the reason I think that is that whilst Siri and Alexa and the like have, they really haven't changed the world significantly. They didn't really make a difference to us unless you like turning your lights on and off with a voice command. if you have the experience of communicating with an LLM, you have an entirely different depth of experience because of this sense of emotional human connection that you get, and you start having discussions with models in a way you would never have with a command-driven Alexa type application. Anyone who hasn't done so, I recommend get the ChatGPT app on your phone for free and try talking to ChatGPT. It's actually slightly mind-blowing in my opinion. So that level of communication and interaction that we have in understanding the human world, but then in creating things that work for the human world, is this ongoing process that we'll see. So multimedia, human emotional connection, empathic AI, and this real sense that the AI is working with us and understands us.
That wraps up our episode here on Big Softies. Thanks very much for joining us today and for sharing your insights. Before we actually close out today's episode, where can our listeners find you?
You can find Attercorp, my company, on www.attercorp.com. That's ATTERCOP.com. I'd also like to give a brief plug to the Brighton AI community, which I am one of the founders of. We're running monthly meetups underneath the aegis of the rather wonderful Silicon Brighton and the work that it does. And you will find us in the meetup group as Brighton AI. Please come along and join us at the next monthly meetup to talk about all things AI related.
So if you'd like to reach out about anything covered in today's chat, or if you'd just like to connect, you can find me at Gavin Adam on LinkedIn. I'm always open to discussions, feedback, or even just a quick hello. So please don't hesitate to contact me. This series has been hosted by Silicon Brighton, where we bring together the tech minds and create opportunities for growth, learning, and connection. Thanks for your time today. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform to stay updated to all our latest episodes.